2 nights before my wedding, I discovered my fiancé had been embezzling from my family's charity for years. As he waited for me at the altar, surrounded by unsuspecting guests, I walked down the aisle with evidence that would not only end our marriage before it began, but send him to prison. I never imagined becoming the bride who destroyed her groom in front of everyone he respected. But when the man you love steals more than your heart, sometimes justice wears a wedding dress. I never planned to become the bride who brought her groom to justice instead of saying I do. But sometimes fate hands you a truth so devastating that it rewrites your entire future in an instant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Everyone thought Jackson Reed and I were the perfect couple. He was charming, successful, and came from one of the most respected families in Oak Ridge Heights. I, Eliza Blackwell, was the daughter of philanthropists who had established the Blackwell Foundation, a charity that had funded medical research and treatment for thousands of children. Our merger, both personal and professional, as Jackson had become the foundation's financial director, seemed like destiny. We'd been together for 4 years. 4 years of vacations in the Maldives, charity galas where we'd dance under crystal, chandeliers, and quiet Sunday mornings planning our future over coffee and the newspaper. I'd fallen in love with his ambitious drive, his apparently selfless dedication to my family's cause, and the way he could charm a room full of donors with just a smile. My mother, Vivian, adored him. "He reminds me of your father when we first met," she'd say, her eyes misty with memories of my late father. My brother Thomas, initially skeptical as brothers often are, had eventually welcomed Jackson into our close-knit family, especially after Jackson helped restructure the foundation's financial systems, supposedly making them more efficient and transparent. Jackson's mother, Eleanor Reed, was already planning our life together, talking about the beautiful grandchildren we would give her. His sister Madeline had become like my own sister, always including me in family gatherings and defending me when Eleanor's expectations became overwhelming. Everything seemed perfect. The wedding plans were coming together beautifully. A spring ceremony at the Oak Ridge Botanical Gardens, with 500 guests including prominent politicians, celebrities who supported our foundation, and family friends who'd known me since childhood. The night that changed everything wasn't meant to be significant. It was just a Thursday, 2 days before our Saturday wedding. Jackson was working late at the foundation office, finalizing some year-end reports before our 3-week honeymoon in New Zealand. I'd been at my final dress fitting and decided to surprise him with late-night sushi from Kenzo, his favorite restaurant. The security guard at the foundation building knew me well and let me in with a wink. "Go on up, Ms. Blackwell. Mr. Reed is still burning the midnight oil." The foundation offices took up the entire 12th floor of the Madison Tower. Usually, bustling with staff, the space was eerily quiet after hours. I noticed the light from Jackson's corner office spilling into the hallway, and I could hear his voice, that smooth, confident tone I'd fallen in love with, engaged in what sounded like a heated phone conversation. I paused at his partially open door, not wanting to interrupt if he was in the middle of something important. That's when I heard words that stopped my heart. "The transfer is complete. Another $5 million moved offshore this quarter." Jackson laughed, a sound I'd heard countless times but suddenly seemed sinister. "The Blackwells suspect nothing. They're too busy planning this ridiculous wedding." I froze, the bag of sushi growing heavy in my suddenly numb fingers. 4 years, man. 4 years of playing the devoted boyfriend while systematically bleeding their foundation dry. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, I'll be long gone. That voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear, but Jackson's response burned into my memory. "Eliza? She's just a means to an end." Sweet girl, but completely naive. Marrying her was always part of the plan. It's easier to steal from family than from employers. Once we're married, I'll have legal access to everything. The other person must have asked a question because Jackson laughed again. No, I'm not staying married to her. Give it a year, maybe less. Once I've transferred enough funds, I'll file for divorce, cite irreconcilable differences. With the prenup she insisted on, she'll think she's protected, but by then it won't matter. The money will be untraceable. I stood there, the world spinning around me. The man I loved, the man I was about to promise my life to in front of everyone, I knew, had been systematically stealing from sick children, using me, planning to abandon me once he'd taken everything he could. Years of memories flashed before my eyes, now tainted with suspicion. The late nights at the office, his insistence on taking over the financial oversight from Thomas, the new digital accounting system that only he fully understood, the investment, opportunities he'd convinced the board to pursue that required moving money through multiple accounts. The signs had been there all along, but I'd been too blinded by love to see them. I don't know how long I stood there, my entire world crumbling around me, but when Jackson said, "Listen, I need to go. I'll call you from the honeymoon. The Blackwells are paying for a private villa in Auckland, plenty of privacy to make the final transfers." Something in me shifted. The shock and heartbreak crystallized into something harder, colder, and more determined. I silently backed away from the door, still clutching the sushi that had gone warm in my hands. My mind was already racing, thinking about the Foundation's records, the access I still had as a Blackwell, and what I needed to do before Saturday. I managed to leave the building without being seen. Instead of going home to the penthouse Jackson and I shared, I drove to Thomas's house, my hands shaking so badly I nearly crashed twice. My brother opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. "Eliza, what happened? Are you hurt?" I collapsed onto his couch, the words pouring out between sobs. Thomas's expression shifted from concern to rage to calculated determination. The look he'd inherited from our father, the one that had helped build the Blackwell empire. "We have 36 hours, he said finally, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Marcus." Marcus Chen had been our family's attorney for 20 years. "We'll need a forensic accountant, too." As Thomas made calls, I sat there, staring at my engagement ring, a family heirloom from the Reed collection, a 4-carat emerald surrounded by diamonds that Eleanor had proudly presented to Jackson for the proposal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Everything about our relationship had been a lie, even the symbol of our commitment. By midnight, Thomas's dining room had transformed into a war room. Marcus had arrived with 2 associates. Our family's private investigator, a former FBI agent named Diana Winters, was already accessing the Foundation's servers remotely. "We need to be careful," Marcus warned. "If he realizes we're onto him, he'll accelerate his plans or disappear entirely." "He won't know," I said, my voice steady despite my shattered heart. "I'll go home tonight. I'll smile. I'll talk about the flowers and the cake. I'll kiss him goodnight. And then tomorrow, at our wedding, he'll learn exactly who he tried to steal from." The night before my wedding had become something entirely different from what I'd imagined. Not a night of excited anticipation, but one of grim determination. As the investigation unfolded in Thomas's dining room, one thing became crystal clear. Jackson Reed had chosen the wrong family to betray. I never thought I'd be that woman, the one who discovers her entire relationship was built on lies. The bride who plans revenge instead of a honeymoon. Yet here I was, 36 hours before what should have been the happiest day of my life, mapping out how to expose the man I loved in front of everyone we knew. The Eliza Blackwell everyone knew was gentle, trusting, perhaps naively so. Growing up as the daughter of philanthropists, I'd been raised to see the good in people, to believe in second chances and the basic decency of humanity. My father, Jonathan Blackwell, built his technology empire from nothing, but what made him extraordinary wasn't his wealth. It was his immediate desire to give it away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Money only matters when it improves lives, he would tell Thomas and me. When he and my mother established the Blackwell Children's Medical Foundation 15 years ago, it quickly became one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country. After my father's death from heart failure 3 years ago, continuing his legacy became my life's purpose. That's why Jackson's betrayal cut so deep. He hadn't just deceived me. He'd stolen from sick children, from my father's legacy. As I sat in Thomas's study at 3 a.m., combing through financial records the team had gathered, I barely recognized myself. The woman who stared back from the reflection in the window wasn't the same person who'd giggled with bridesmaids at her final dress fitting just hours earlier. This woman's eyes were hard, calculating, her mouth set in determination. "We've found something," Diana said, breaking my reverie. She pushed a laptop toward me, the screen filled with spreadsheets and banking records. "Look at these transfers, small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but consistent. Always routed through 3 separate accounts before landing in an offshore entity called Artemis Holdings." "Artemis?" I whispered. Jackson's dog when he was a child was named Artemis. He told me it was his first love. Even his sentimental stories had been part of the con. Thomas leaned over my shoulder, his face grim. $5 million this quarter alone, nearly $20 million over the past 3 years. $20 million that should have gone to medical research, to hospital wings, to treatment programs for children who couldn't afford care. I thought of the families I'd met, parents who held fundraisers selling cookies and t-shirts, desperately trying to save their children, all while the man who promised to love me was siphoning away their hope. "We can go to the police right now," Marcus said. "With what we've already found, they'll arrest him immediately." I shook my head slowly. No, not yet. A plan was forming in my mind, one that would ensure Jackson couldn't just hire an expensive lawyer and slip away, one that would make absolutely certain everyone knew exactly who he was. "Eliza," Thomas said cautiously, "what are you thinking?" "The wedding will proceed as planned," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Everyone will be there. The board members, the donors, his family, the press covering the society wedding of the year. If we go to the police now, he might post bail. His family might protect him. Some might even question the evidence." Diana nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But if you expose him publicly, with irrefutable evidence, there will be nowhere to hide," I finished. "No way to control the narrative." Marcus looked worried. "Eliza, are you sure? That kind of public confrontation, the emotional toll alone?" "I've already paid the emotional toll, Marcus," I interrupted. "Finding out the man I loved, I corrected myself, was using me? That everything we built together was a lie? I've already been destroyed in private. Now it's his turn to be destroyed in public." As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, our plan took shape. The forensic accountant would work through the night to prepare a complete report. Diana would trace every penny, documenting exactly how Jackson had moved the money and where it had ended up. Thomas would quietly alert security to be present at the wedding without telling them why, and I would return home to Jackson as if nothing had changed. Walking into our penthouse at 7 a.m. felt like entering a stranger's home. Everything looked the same. The modern furniture we'd chosen together, photos from our vacations, my favorite flowers, peonies that Jackson had thoughtfully ordered for the days leading up to the wedding. But now I saw it all differently. How much of our life together had been calculated. Had he researched my favorite flowers before our first date? Had he practiced his proposal in the mirror before getting down on one knee at my favorite restaurant? Had he ever loved me at all? Jackson was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in. He looked up with a smile that once made my heart race but now made my skin crawl. "There's my beautiful bride," he said, crossing to kiss me. I forced myself not to flinch. "Where have you been? I woke up and you were gone." The lie came easily. "Last-minute wedding jitters. I needed some air, so I went for a drive and then stopped by to see Thomas." Not entirely untrue. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained fixed. "Everything. Okay?" "Perfect," I lied, accepting the coffee he offered. "Just perfect. Tomorrow's going to be exactly what we've both worked for." He seemed satisfied with my answer and launched into details about a call with the honeymoon villa's concierge. I watched him talk, mesmerized by the performance. Every gesture, every expression that I once found endearing now seemed rehearsed. Had there ever been a genuine moment between us? As I excused myself to shower and change for the rehearsal dinner scheduled that evening, I caught a glimpse of my wedding dress hanging in its garment bag. The custom Marchesa gown with its delicate beading and cathedral train had cost more than some people's cars. I'd chosen it imagining Jackson's face as I walked down the aisle. Now it would serve a different purpose. Not a symbol of love and commitment, but armor for battle. "I'll make you proud, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "No one steals from your legacy. No one." Jackson Reed and I met at a charity gala for the Blackwell Foundation 4 years ago. It was the first major event I'd hosted after my father's passing, and I was determined to make it perfect. The Grand Palladium Hotel ballroom glittered with candlelight and the diamonds of New York's elite, all gathered to support pediatric cancer research. I was reviewing the auction items when a voice behind me said, "The Monet reproduction doesn't do justice to the original in Giverny." I turned to find myself face to face with the most captivating man I'd ever seen. Tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples and eyes the color of aged whiskey, he had a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "You've been to Giverny?" I asked, intrigued despite the chaos of managing the event. "Last spring," he replied. "I studied art history before getting my MBA. Some passions never fade." He introduced himself as Jackson Reed, recently returned from London where he'd been working in finance. His family name was immediately familiar. The Reeds owned a shipping empire dating back 3 generations, though I learned later that evening that Jackson had branched off to make his own way in investment banking. What I didn't know then was how carefully he'd orchestrated our meeting. I discovered much later that he'd researched me extensively, donated a precisely calculated amount to secure an invitation, and positioned himself near items he knew I'd inspected personally. That night, as we talked about art and travel and the Foundation's work, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my father died. A connection, a spark of possibility. When Jackson asked for my number at the end of the evening, I gave it without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind of thoughtfulness and romance. Flowers delivered to my office with notes quoting my favorite poets. Weekend trips to little towns I'd mentioned wanting to visit. He remembered everything, from my coffee order to the name of my childhood pet. 3 months after we began dating, there was an opening at the foundation for a financial director. Jackson casually mentioned his experience in nonprofit fiscal management, something I'd had no idea about. His resume was impeccable, with recommendations from respected names in philanthropy. "It might be awkward," he said, seeming hesitant. "Dating the founder's daughter while working for the foundation." "Only if we make it awkward," I'd replied. In truth, I was thrilled at the prospect of working together, of sharing all aspects of my life with this man who seemed to understand me so completely. The board hired him unanimously. Within 6 months, Jackson had implemented new financial systems that he claimed would maximize the impact of every donated dollar. The board, composed largely of my parents' friends who had limited financial expertise, trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't they? His credentials were stellar, his demeanor professional and passionate about our cause. My mother, Vivian, was particularly charmed. After my father died, she'd retreated somewhat from the foundation's daily operations, focusing instead on her grief and her garden. Jackson brought her back, involving her in decisions, taking her to lunch regularly to update her on the foundation's work. "He reminds me so much of your father," she told me over brunch one Sunday, about a year into my relationship with Jackson. That same drive, that same commitment to helping others. It was the highest compliment she could give, and it moved me to tears. My father had been my hero, brilliant, compassionate, and tireless in his mission to improve children's health care. The comparison sealed my fate. If Jackson reminded my mother of my father, he must be the one. Thomas was the only note of discord. My brother, 2 years older and considerably more skeptical than me, maintained a polite but reserved relationship with Jackson. "There's something too perfect about him," Thomas told me once after a family dinner. "Nobody's that put together. Eliza. Nobody remembers every detail, says exactly the right thing every time." I'd dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness. "You're impossible to please," I'd teased. "If he were flawed, you'd complain about that instead." Thomas had shrugged. "Maybe. Just be careful, that's all." But careful was the last thing I wanted to be. After watching my father's decline, a strong man gradually weakened by heart failure until he slipped away in the night, I'd learned that life was precious and short. Jackson made me happy. He supported my work with the foundation. He seemed to love me completely. When he proposed on the second anniversary of our first meeting at the same gala where we'd met, I didn't hesitate before saying yes. The ballroom erupted in applause as he slipped his grandmother's emerald ring onto my finger. Planning the wedding became a joyful collaboration between our families. Eleanor Reed, Jackson's mother, was a formidable woman who had maintained the family's social standing after her husband died in a sailing accident years earlier. She embraced me warmly, though her standards were exacting. "A Reed wedding is not just a celebration," she informed me over tea at her Connecticut estate. "It's a statement." The guest list grew from my initial thought of 200 to over 500. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, anyone who mattered in our social circle was included. The Botanical Gardens, with its grand glass conservatory and sprawling rose gardens, was secured for a small fortune. The 12-piece orchestra was flown in from Vienna. My dress was hand-beaded by artisans who had worked for royalty. Through it all, Jackson was my rock, managing details when I felt overwhelmed, soothing tensions between our mothers when they disagreed about flowers or menu selections, reminding me that beneath the spectacle was the simple truth of our love. Meanwhile, the foundation thrived under Jackson's financial guidance. The annual report showed record growth. New programs launched in 3 additional cities. A research grant we funded led to a breakthrough treatment protocol for a rare form of childhood, leukemia. Life was unfolding exactly as I'd hoped. I had purpose through my father's legacy, love with a man who supported that purpose, and a future that seemed brilliant with promise. "You're the luckiest woman I know," my friend Mia told me at my bridal shower. "Smart, gorgeous, wealthy, and marrying a man who adores you. Some people have it all." I'd smiled and agreed, never suspecting that beneath this perfect surface, something sinister was growing. A betrayal so complete it would shatter not just my heart, but my entire understanding of the past 4 years. Life with Jackson settled into a comfortable rhythm as our wedding approached. Our penthouse in the exclusive Archer building overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with light during the day and offering a tapestry of city lights at night. We decorated it together, blending my preference for warm, inviting spaces with his more minimalist aesthetic. Weekday mornings followed a predictable pattern. Jackson would rise at 5:30 a.m. for his run, returning just as I was getting out of the shower. We'd share breakfast, usually something healthy that our private chef had prepared the day before, while reviewing our schedules. He'd kiss me goodbye at 7:15, heading to the foundation offices while I typically worked from home until mid-morning, managing the charitable initiatives that were my personal projects. "Your father would be proud," Jackson often told me when I secured a new corporate sponsor or launched a program for families struggling with medical bills. "You've taken his vision and elevated it." Those words always warmed me, healing some of the lingering grief from my father's passing. Jackson knew exactly how to comfort me, how to build me up when I doubted myself. Thursday evenings were reserved for dinner with Vivian at her Upper East Side brownstone. My mother had maintained her elegance through widowhood, her silver hair, always perfectly styled, her clothes understated but impeccably tailored. She'd embraced Jackson as the son she'd never had beyond Thomas, often seeking his advice on investments and foundation matters that she once would have discussed with my father. "He'll make a wonderful husband," she told me 6 months before the wedding, as we enjoyed coffee in her solarium. "He has that rare combination of ambition and kindness." Only now do I realize how skillfully Jackson had cultivated her approval. The books on her favorite historical periods that would appear on his way over. The small technological problems around her house that he'd fix without being asked. The way he'd draw her into conversations at events when she might otherwise have felt invisible as an older widow. Weekends often involved foundation events, galas, golf tournaments, art auctions, where Jackson and I presented a united front. He was masterful with donors, remembering personal details about their families and business interests, making each person feel specially connected to our cause. "You've got a gift," I told him after watching him secure a 7-figure donation from a notoriously tight-fisted hedge fund manager. "People just naturally trust you." He'd smiled that crooked smile that made my heart skip. "They trust the cause, Eliza. They trust you. I'm just the numbers guy." When we weren't working, we traveled. Long weekends in the Hamptons or Martha's. Vineyard, ski trips to Aspen, cultural excursions to European capitals. Jackson's passport was filled with stamps, his knowledge of global cuisines and customs impressive. He claimed it came from his banking days, though I later discovered many of those trips had been fabricated or embellished. The wedding planning accelerated in the final months. I'd appointed my cousin Natalie as my maid of honor, along with 5 bridesmaids including Jackson's sister Madeline. Our colors were sage green and cream, chosen to complement the spring gardens where we'd exchange vows. "Everything is coming together beautifully," our wedding planner Genevieve assured us at our final meeting 2 weeks before the ceremony. It will be the event of the season. The guest list had grown to include 3 senators, a Supreme Court justice, 2 Oscar-winning actors who supported children's causes, and dozens of business leaders. The Botanical Gardens had never hosted such a prestigious assembly. 10 days before the wedding, the gifts began arriving. Massive silver serving pieces from Tiffany, crystal from Baccarat, artwork, checks with many zeros written to the foundation in lieu of traditional presents. Each night, Jackson and I would sit in our living room opening packages and writing thank you notes. "We'll need a bigger apartment," he joked one evening, surveying the mountain of gifts. "Or maybe a house outside the city," I suggested. "For weekends and eventually, when we have children." He'd smiled and pulled me close. "I'd like that. A place where our kids can run around, like the estate where I grew up." Children had become a more frequent topic as the wedding approached. Jackson spoke of them with apparent enthusiasm, suggesting names, debating private versus public schools, even discussing which genetic traits he hoped they'd inherit. "Your brains, definitely," he'd say. "And your compassion. But maybe my height and natural athletic ability." I'd pictured them so clearly. A boy with Jackson's confident smile and a little girl with his thoughtful eyes. Another generation to continue the Blackwell legacy of philanthropy, guided by the values of both our families. At the foundation, the fiscal year was ending just before our wedding. Jackson had been working late, finalizing reports and preparing for the board meeting that would take place the week after our return from the honeymoon. "Everything looks excellent," he told me over dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant La Terrazza, 3 nights before the wedding. "The portfolio has outperformed projections by nearly 12%. I'd raised my wine glass in a toast. "To my brilliant fiancé. The foundation has never been in better hands." His smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly I thought I'd imagined it. Then he clinked his glass against mine. "To us, and to changing the world, one child at a time." The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday night at the Riverside Club, a historical venue overlooking the Hudson. 70 of our closest friends and family would attend, hearing toasts and celebrating the union that would be formalized the next day. 2 nights before that dinner, before I discovered the truth, Jackson and I lay in bed talking about final details. "Nervous?" he asked, stroking my hair as I rested my head on his chest. "Not about marrying you," I said truthfully. "Just about the scale of it all. So many people watching." "Just focus on me," he said softly. "When you walk down that aisle, pretend it's only us." I'd fallen asleep feeling completely secure in his love, in our future together, in the life we were building that would honor my father's memory while creating something uniquely ours. That was the last night of my innocence. The last night I would trust without question. The last night I would love Jackson Reed without reservation or doubt. The next evening, everything I believed about my life, my love, and my future would shatter, like crystal dropped on marble. The day had been hectic, a whirlwind of last-minute wedding preparations that left me both exhausted and exhilarated. My final dress fitting at Elaine's bridal boutique had gone perfectly. The Marchesa gown fit as if it had been spun around me by fairy godmothers. The delicate beadwork caught the light as I turned before the 3-way mirror, and for a moment, I glimpsed myself as I would appear walking down the aisle, radiant, hopeful, in love. "You look like an angel," Elaine had whispered, making final adjustments to the cathedral-length veil. Later, I'd met with the florist to approve the final arrangements. Garden roses in soft cream with sprigs of eucalyptus, wrapped in ivory satin ribbon. Then a stop at the calligrapher's studio to collect the last batch of hand-lettered place cards for the reception. Every detail was falling into place for what the society pages were already calling the wedding of the decade. I wasn't planning to see Jackson that evening. He'd told me he had a dinner meeting with the foundation's investment advisors and, afterward, he'd be working late again to finalize the quarterly reports. We'd agreed to spend the night before our rehearsal dinner apart, to make seeing each other the next day even more special, he'd said with a wink. But as I drove home past Madison Tower, where the foundation offices occupied the 12th floor, I noticed the lights were still on despite the late hour. A sudden impulse struck me. I would surprise Jackson with his favorite late-night indulgence, sushi from Kenzo, and perhaps a bottle of the rare Japanese whiskey he loved. A small romantic gesture amid the wedding chaos. Kenzo was only a few blocks away. I quickly called in an order: hamachi nigiri, spicy tuna rolls, and the special dragon roll that Jackson always requested. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the private parking garage beneath Madison Tower, a bag of still-warm sushi in hand and a sleek black bag containing the whiskey beside me. "Working late again, Ms. Blackwell?" Samuel, the night security guard, greeted me with a warm smile. "Just bringing some sustenance to my hard-working fiancé," I replied, holding up the bag. "Is he still here?" "Yes, ma'am. Been here since this morning, far as I know." Dedication, that's what that is. Samuel swiped his security card to grant me access to the executive elevator. As the doors closed, I checked my appearance in the mirrored walls, my dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, dressed casually in jeans and a cashmere sweater. Not exactly glamorous, but Jackson always said he loved me best this way. Natural, unaffected. The 12th floor was eerily quiet as I stepped off the elevator. Most of the lights had been dimmed, though the emergency exit signs cast a soft red glow along the hallway. I could see light spilling from Jackson's corner office at the end of the corridor, and as I approached, I heard his voice, animated, almost excited. I was about to announce my presence when something in his tone made me pause at the slightly open door. He was on the phone, his chair swiveled to face the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering Manhattan skyline. "The final transfers are complete," he was saying, his voice clear in the silent office. 22 million total, all. Secure in the Cayman accounts, another 15 projected over the next 6 months. I froze, the sushi suddenly heavy in my hands. Something about his tone, so businesslike, so cold, sent a chill through me. "Yes, the wedding is still on for Saturday," he continued with a laugh that sounded nothing like the warm chuckle I thought I knew. "Trust me, it's necessary. Once we're married, my access to the Blackwell funds becomes nearly unassailable. The prenup actually works in my favor in that regard. It keeps my assets separate, which means they won't look closely at where the money is coming from." My heart began to pound so loudly I was certain he would hear it. Prenup? We had indeed signed one at my family's insistence, but it was straightforward, protecting the bulk of my inheritance and foundation assets while allowing for fair distribution of anything we built together during the marriage. The person on the other end of the call said something I couldn't hear, and Jackson laughed again. "The old lady is completely clueless. Vivian's so grateful to have a son again that she rubber stamps anything I put in front of her. The board's the same, a bunch of aging philanthropists who don't know a balance sheet from a bedsheet." A pause, then. "Eliza? She's the easiest mark of all. So desperate to believe in love after losing Daddy. I knew she was perfect the moment. I researched her. Wealthy, trusting, emotionally vulnerable after her father's death. Add in that bleeding heart of hers, and she practically handed me the keys to the kingdom." The sushi slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the carpeted hallway. Some distant part of my brain worried about the noise, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Jackson continued, unaware of my presence. "Look, I didn't spend 4 years playing the devoted boyfriend for nothing, learning her favorite books, pretending to care about sick kids, listening to her drone on about her father's legacy. It's all been building to this. After the wedding, I'll have legal access to everything. The honeymoon is the perfect cover for the final transfers." Another pause. I pressed myself against the wall, afraid my legs would give way. "Exit strategy? Already in place. Give it 6 months, maybe a year. I'll file for divorce, cite her emotional instability or something equally vague. The prenup works both ways. She keeps her assets, I keep mine. Except by then, a significant portion of her assets will have become mine." He swiveled in his chair, and I caught sight of his reflection in the window. That handsome face I'd loved, now twisted into an expression of calculated greed I'd never seen before. "It's the perfect con, really," he said, pride evident in his voice. "She thinks we're building a life together, continuing her precious foundation work, maybe having a few kids. Meanwhile, I'm executing the most profitable long game I've ever played." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I remained frozen, unable to confront him, unable to flee. The best part? Even if something went wrong, who would believe it? The devoted fiancé stealing from a children's charity. I've built the perfect reputation. Board member at 3 nonprofits, regular donor to political campaigns, mentor to underprivileged youth. I'm untouchable. The voice on the phone must have warned him about something because his tone changed, becoming more serious. "Relax. The Blackwells suspect nothing. Thomas is the only one with enough financial sense to potentially spot the discrepancies, but he's been too busy with his own projects to look closely at my work. By the time anyone notices anything amiss, the money will be untraceable and I'll be long gone." He laughed one more time. "Besides, who steals from sick children? It's so despicable that no one would even consider it a possibility. In that moment, as I stood shaking in the hallway outside his office, the man I thought I knew disappeared completely, replaced by a stranger wearing Jackson's face, speaking with Jackson's voice, but possessing none of his supposed warmth or integrity. My entire world collapsed around me, the future I had planned disintegrating with each word he spoke. "I should go," Jackson said, his voice dropping slightly. "I need to make sure everything's in place before the board meeting next week. By then, we'll be sipping champagne in Auckland, and another 3 million will be safely offshore." I heard him stand up, the leather of his executive chair creaking slightly. With a surge of panic, I realized he might walk out and discover me. On instinct, I backed away silently, retreating toward the elevator. The bag of sushi remained on the floor, forgotten evidence of my presence. As the elevator doors closed, encasing me in momentary safety, the full horror of what I'd heard crashed over me in waves. Jackson, my Jackson, was a fraud, a con artist, who had targeted my family, infiltrated our foundation, and systematically stolen millions meant for children fighting for their lives. The revelation was so monstrous that my mind struggled to process it. Each memory of our relationship now required reevaluation. The chance meeting at the gala, had he engineered it? The romantic gestures, the thoughtful gifts, the apparent passion for the Foundation's mission, all calculated moves in an elaborate con. Even more devastating was the realization of how completely I had fallen for it. I'd defended him to Thomas, welcomed him into our family, given him access to my heart and our resources. I had been, as he so cruelly put it, the perfect mark. The parking garage was a blur. I found my car and somehow managed to drive, though I couldn't tell you the route I took. My first coherent thought was that I needed evidence, proof of what I'd heard. Without it, it would be my word against his, and Jackson had spent years cultivating his image as the perfect partner and philanthropist. Thomas. I needed to get to Thomas. My brother lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a deliberate choice, to distance himself somewhat from the Manhattan social whirl our family typically inhabited. It was past 11 p.m. when I rang his doorbell repeatedly, not caring about the late hour. When he opened the door in sweatpants and an old Harvard t-shirt, his irritation immediately transformed to concern. "Eliza? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" I pushed, past him into the hallway, my body finally giving way to violent trembling. "It's Jackson," I managed. He's been stealing from the Foundation. Millions, Thomas. For years." Thomas guided me to his living room, his face grave but not entirely surprised. "Tell me everything," he said, pressing a glass of water into my shaking hands. The story spilled out of me. The overheard phone call, the callous way Jackson had spoken about our family, the elaborate scheme he'd been running. As I talked, Thomas's expression hardened, his jaw tightening with each new detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "I knew something was off. I could never pinpoint it, but my gut told me he was too perfect." "Why didn't you say something?" I whispered. Thomas sighed heavily. "I did, Eliza. Subtly, then more directly. But you were so happy, and I had no proof. Just a feeling." He was right. I remembered his cautious questions about the Foundation's new financial systems, his suggestion that we bring in external auditors for a review, suggestions I had dismissed as overprotective brother behavior. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling utterly lost. Thomas's eyes met mine, determination replacing his initial shock. "First, we get proof. Concrete evidence of the theft and the offshore accounts. Then we decide how to handle it." "The wedding is in 2 days," I said, my voice breaking. 2 days, Thomas." "I know." He squeezed my hand. But maybe that timing works in our favor. Everyone will be gathered in one place, the board members, the donors, the press. If we can confirm what you heard, you think we should expose him at the wedding? The idea was simultaneously horrifying and oddly satisfying. Thomas didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached for his phone. "I'm calling Marcus. We need legal counsel before we do anything." Marcus Chen had been our family's attorney since before I was born. And Diana Winters. If anyone can find a paper trail in 36 hours, it's her. As Thomas made calls, the numbness that had enveloped me began to recede, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Anger. Not just at Jackson, but at myself for being so thoroughly deceived. Thought of the children I'd met through the Foundation's work. 8-year-old Lily, battling leukemia with a courage that humbled me. The Rodriguez twins, whose rare genetic disorder required treatments costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The parents who held fundraisers and bake sales, scraping together donations a few dollars at a time, believing that every penny would go toward research and treatment. Jackson had stolen from them all, and he had used me, my name, my trust, my love, to do it. By midnight, Thomas's dining room had become an impromptu command center. Marcus arrived first, his silver hair disheveled, still wearing the casual clothes he'd thrown on after Thomas's call. Diana followed shortly after, her laptop under her arm, her expression grimly professional. "I need access to all Foundation systems," she said without preamble. "And we need to move quickly before he realizes we're investigating." I provided my credentials, though they offered limited access to the financial systems Jackson had redesigned. He created separate administrator accounts for the financial portals, I explained. Only he and the 2 accountants who report directly to him have full access. Diana's smile was thin. "Trust me, if the evidence exists on those servers, I'll find it." As she set up her equipment, Marcus explained the legal implications of what we were facing. If what you overheard is accurate, we're looking at multiple felonies: embezzlement, wire fraud, possibly money laundering. The Foundation itself could face liability issues if this becomes public. "It will become public," I said firmly. "I won't let him get away with this." Marcus nodded, understanding the determination behind my words. "Then we need to be strategic. If we go to the authorities without irrefutable evidence, his legal team will bury this in procedural delays. Meanwhile, the Foundation's reputation will suffer, and the children who depend on your programs will be the real victims." Thomas, who had been pacing the room, stopped abruptly. "We need to catch him red-handed, with evidence so overwhelming that neither his family's money nor his cultivated image can save him." "The wedding," I said, the idea crystallizing in my mind. "We expose him at the wedding in front of everyone who matters in this city. The press will be there, the board, members, donors, his family, everyone who believes in Jackson Reed's carefully crafted persona." Diana looked up from her computer. "That's in 36 hours. Ambitious timeline." "Can you do it?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, steely with determination. "I've solved cases with less time and fewer resources. But you need to be prepared for what this will mean, Eliza. The public humiliation, the media frenzy, the questions about how you didn't know." I thought about the alternative: proceeding with the wedding, becoming Mrs. Jackson Reed, perhaps even having children with a man who had targeted me for my family's wealth and access. A man who could speak of stealing from sick children with pride in his voice. "I can handle the humiliation," I said quietly. "What I can't handle is letting him get away with this." The night stretched ahead of us, long and grueling, but for the first time since overhearing Jackson's call, I felt something like purpose cutting through my despair. As dawn broke over the city, I stood at Thomas's living room window, watching. The sky transformed from inky black to steel gray to pale gold. I hadn't slept, yet I felt strangely alert, as if a new part of me had awakened overnight. Diana worked silently at the dining table, her fingers flying over the keyboard, pausing occasionally to scribble notes or mutter to herself. Marcus had left around 3 a.m. to contact a judge he knew, someone who might grant emergency warrants if necessary. Thomas had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was dozing on the couch behind me. The quiet gave me time to think, to grapple with the warring emotions inside me. Betrayal clawed at my heart, leaving wounds I couldn't yet measure. Humiliation burned hot across my skin. How many people had laughed behind my back as Jackson played me for a fool? Beneath it all ran a current of fear. Fear that he would escape justice. Fear of facing the public spectacle that was coming. Fear that my trust had been so thoroughly shattered that I might never recover. But there was something else too. Something unfamiliar but powerful. Resolve. A steely determination that Jackson would pay for what he'd done, not just to me, but to the children his theft had harmed. My phone buzzed with a message from Jackson. "Morning, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight at the rehearsal dinner. I love you." I stared at the words, so familiar and once so cherished. Now they turned my stomach. How could he lie so easily, so convincingly? How could he say, "I love you," while systematically destroying everything my family had built? Thomas stirred behind me. "Have you been standing there all night?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just thinking." He joined me at the window. About what? About how I didn't see it. All the signs were there. His insistence on controlling the financial systems, the convenient explanations when I asked questions, the way he charmed everyone into compliance. I should have known. Thomas's arm went around my shoulders. "Eliza, he fooled everyone. Professional investors, the board, Mom, people with decades more experience than you. But I was the closest to him. I should have sensed something wasn't right." "Love blinds us," Thomas said simply. "It's not your fault." "But it is my responsibility to fix it," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Diana called from the dining room. "I've found something." We joined her at the table, where her laptop screen displayed a complex web of financial transactions. "He was clever," she said, pointing to the flowchart she'd created. Small amounts, usually under $50,000, moved through a series of legitimate-looking transfers. Foundation money would go to vendors for services, consulting, software development, research grants. But these entities were shells. The money would bounce through 3 or 4 accounts before landing in Artemis Holdings. "Can you prove the shell companies connect to Jackson?" Thomas asked. Diana smiled grimly. "That's where he got sloppy. The initial paperwork for Artemis Holdings lists a James Reed as the primary officer. James is Jackson's middle name." "That's not definitive," I said, disappointment flooding through me. "No, but this is." She pulled up another document. The Cayman account where most of the funds ended up was opened with Jackson's passport. I have the scanned copy right here, submitted with the banking application. I stared at the familiar face in the passport photo. The same face that had gazed at me across candlelit dinners. The same eyes that had looked into mine as he promised forever. "How much?" I asked quietly. Diana hesitated. "Total? It's hard to be exact without a full forensic accounting, but based on what I've found so far, at least $22 million over the past 3 years. The figure staggered me. $22 million. Dollars that should have funded research, treatment programs, family support services. $22 million stolen from children fighting for their lives. "We need to go to the police," Thomas said firmly. I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until we have everything in place." "Eliza, we have enough—" "For what?" I interrupted. "For his lawyers to create reasonable doubt? For the money to disappear even further offshore? For Jackson to flee before he's even charged?" I stood up, suddenly certain of what needed to happen. "No." We do this my way." Thomas and Diana exchanged glances. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thomas asked carefully. I took a deep breath. "The wedding proceeds as planned. I go home now and pretend everything is normal. I attend the rehearsal dinner tonight. I smile and laugh and play the happy bride. And then?" Diana prompted. "And then, tomorrow, I expose him. Publicly. Completely. With evidence so overwhelming that not even the Reed family money can make it disappear." "That's risky," Thomas warned. "If he suspects anything—" "He won't," I said with confidence I didn't fully feel. "His ego won't allow him to believe I could outsmart him." Diana looked thoughtful. "It could work. A public exposure would make it nearly impossible for this to be swept under the rug. The press will be there, the city's most influential people, and the board members who need to understand how thoroughly they were deceived," I added. Thomas still looked concerned. "What about you, Eliza? Have you considered what this will do to you? The media scrutiny, the gossip, the inevitable questions about how you didn't know what your own fiancé was doing?" I had considered it. All night, as I stood watching the city lights, I had imagined the headlines, the whispers, the pitying looks. The beautiful Blackwell heiress, left at the altar after discovering her fiancé was a thief. It would be humiliating, painful, a public spectacle of my most private heartbreak. But the alternative was worse. I'd rather be known as the woman who exposed the truth than the fool who married a criminal, I said quietly. Besides, this isn't about me. It's about the foundation, Dad's legacy, and the children who depend on us. Thomas studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, we do it your way. But you won't face this alone. I'll be right beside you." I squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his support. Diana cleared her throat. "If we're really doing this, we need a plan. A detailed, choreographed plan that leaves nothing to chance." She was right. The next 36 hours would require precision. One misstep, one hint to Jackson that I knew the truth, and everything would unravel. "I need to go home," I said, checking the time. "Jackson will expect me for breakfast. We always have breakfast together the day before big events." The thought of sitting across from him, pretending everything was normal while knowing what I knew, made my stomach turn. But it was necessary. Every moment of deception on my part now was in service of the greater truth to come. "Can you do this?" Thomas asked softly. "Can you look him in the eye and not let him see what you know?" I thought about the children I'd met through the foundation. I thought about my father, whose life's work was being corrupted by the man I had loved. I thought about the calculated way Jackson had targeted me, using my grief and trust against me. "Yes," I said, a new resolve, hardening within me. "I can do this, and tomorrow Jackson Reed will learn that he chose the wrong woman to betray." Diana pulled out a fresh legal pad and uncapped a pen with decisive precision. "All right, if we're going to expose Jackson at the wedding, we need an airtight plan. We can't leave anything to chance." Marcus returned, looking tired but satisfied. "I spoke with Judge Hernandez. She's willing to issue the necessary warrants once we present our evidence, but she wants everything documented properly." "Timeline?" Thomas asked. "She'll be available tomorrow morning. If everything checks out, we can have the warrants ready before the ceremony." I nodded, my mind racing. "So we'll have legal backing, but we still need to coordinate the actual exposure. We need to think about location, timing, security." Diana started making notes. "First, let's establish our goals. What exactly do we want to accomplish tomorrow?" "Exposure," I said immediately. Jackson publicly revealed for who he truly is. "Evidence preservation," Thomas added. "We need to ensure he can't destroy any remaining documentation or move the money further offshore." "And asset freezing," Marcus concluded. "We need to lock down those accounts as quickly as possible, hopefully recover the stolen funds." Diana wrote everything down. then looked up. Now for the how. Eliza, you mentioned exposing him at the wedding, but we need to be specific. When exactly? During the ceremony? At the reception? I hadn't thought that far ahead, but now the answer seemed obvious. During the ceremony, right after the minister asks if anyone has any reason why we shouldn't be married. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That's dramatic. It's perfect, I countered. Everyone will be present. The board, the donors, the press. And the symbolism matters. I'm not just stopping a wedding. I'm preventing a fraud from being completed. Diana nodded slowly. It could work, but we need to ensure Jackson can't simply walk out or take control of the narrative. Security, Marcus said. We'll need trusted personnel stationed at all exits, not to create a scene, but to ensure he remains until the authorities arrive. I can arrange that, Thomas offered. The security company we use for foundation events is discreet and professional. What about the evidence? I asked. How do we present it in a way that's irrefutable? Diana tapped her pen against the pad. I'm compiling everything into a clear, visual presentation, flowcharts showing the money movement, copies of the fraudulent documentation, bank records. We'll need to make it simple enough for non-financial people to understand immediately. We should also have copies ready for key people, Marcus suggested. The board members, certain press contacts, the authorities. Printed packets, I decided. In sealed envelopes, distributed at my signal by people we trust. Your bridesmaids? Thomas suggested. I shook my head. Too risky. Most of them are friends with Jackson too. I don't want to put them in that position, and I can't be sure they wouldn't inadvertently tip him off. The wedding planners, then, Diana proposed. We can bring them in discreetly tomorrow morning, explain that we've discovered something troubling and need their help. Genevieve would do it, I said, thinking of our unflappable wedding planner. She's the consummate professional, and she's coordinated high-security events for diplomats before. Thomas was making his own notes now. What about Jackson's reaction? We need to be prepared for how he might respond. Denial is almost certain. He'll try to discredit me, I said, the realization sinking in. He'll say I'm having a breakdown, that I'm unstable after my father's death, that I misunderstood legitimate business transactions. Which is why the evidence needs to be absolutely airtight, Marcus emphasized, and presented in a way that allows no room for alternative explanations. We'll also need witness statements, Diana added. The vendors he created, the banks involved. I'm tracking down contacts now, but we won't be able to get formal statements before tomorrow. What about a recording? I suggested suddenly. What? If I could get him to admit to something incriminating before the wedding? Thomas looked alarmed. Eliza, that's dangerous. If he suspects anything. It doesn't have to be a full confession, I clarified. Just something that corroborates our evidence. Something that shows his true character. Diana considered this. It could work, but it needs to be handled carefully. The rehearsal dinner tonight might provide an opportunity. A moment alone, a carefully phrased question. I'll handle it, I said with more confidence than I felt. I know how to get him. Talking about the foundation's finances, he enjoys showing off his expertise to me. Marcus checked his watch. Speaking of time, you need to get home soon. Jackson will wonder where you've been all night. I nodded, steeling myself for the performance ahead. I'll tell him I had last minute wedding jitters and stayed at a hotel to clear my head. He'll believe that. He thinks I'm an open book, incapable of deception. What if he's already discovered the sushi you dropped at his office? Thomas asked, concern evident in his voice. Then I'll say I wanted to surprise him but heard him on a business call and didn't want to interrupt. It's plausible enough. I gathered my purse, checking my appearance in the hallway mirror. I looked exhausted but determined, not at all like a blissful bride-to-be. I need to freshen up before I see him. Diana handed me a small device. Wear this tonight. It looks like a normal brooch, but it's a recording device. If you get him talking about anything related to the foundation or the finances, activate it by pressing the center. I pinned it to my sweater, oddly comforted by its weight. How will we coordinate tomorrow? Once I'm in the bridal suite getting ready, communication will be difficult. Burner phones, Diana decided, pulling 2 identical prepaid phones from her bag. I already programmed them with our contacts. Keep it with you at all times. Thomas pulled me into a tight hug. Are you sure about this, Eliza? We could still go to the authorities right now. I pulled back, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm sure. Jackson Reed has spent 4 years manipulating me, using me to steal from sick children. Tomorrow he learns what it feels like to be the one who's blindsided. As Diana and Marcus finalized details of our plan, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock and pain had transformed into something harder, more focused. Jackson had spent years crafting his perfect con, but he'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. He'd underestimated me. He saw me as the grieving daughter, the trusting fiancé, the perfect mark, a means to an end in his elaborate scheme. But I was still a Blackwell. My father hadn't just left me a foundation and a fortune. He'd instilled in me a core of steel that grief had temporarily softened but never broken. Tomorrow, Jackson would discover exactly who he had chosen to betray. We have 18 hours until the rehearsal dinner, Diana announced, circling the time on her notepad. Let's use every minute to ensure tomorrow goes exactly as planned. I nodded, already mentally preparing for the role I would play. The final performance as Jackson Reed's loving, unsuspecting fiancé. Returning to the penthouse I shared with Jackson felt surreal, as if I were stepping onto a movie set of my former life. Everything looked the same. The cream-colored sofa where we'd spent countless evenings planning our future, the framed photographs chronicling our relationship, the vase of fresh peonies Jackson ordered weekly because he knew they were my favorite. But now I saw it all differently. The careful curation of a con man's stage. I showered and changed quickly, erasing the physical evidence of my sleepless night at Thomas's apartment. The makeup I applied served a dual purpose, hiding the shadows under my eyes and creating a mask behind which I could conceal my true feelings. I heard the front door open as I was blow-drying my hair. Eliza? Jackson's voice called out, that familiar warm tone that had once made my heart leap. Are you home, sweetheart? I took a deep breath, checking my reflection one last time. Eyes bright, smile natural, Diana's recording brooch pinned discreetly to my blouse. I stepped into the hallway. In here, I called back, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Jackson appeared in the doorway, handsome in his charcoal suit, his expression shifting from concern to relief when he saw me. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into an embrace. Where were you last night? I came home late and you weren't here. I was worried. I allowed myself to be held, fighting the revulsion that threatened to give me away. I'm sorry. I should have called. I was feeling overwhelmed with all the wedding details and needed some space to clear my head. I got a hotel room for the night. He pulled back, studying my face with what once would have seemed like loving concern. Now I recognized it as calculation, assessing whether my story was genuine, whether his carefully constructed world remained secure. Are you having doubts? He asked softly. About us? The irony of his question almost made me laugh. Instead, I shook my head. Not about us. Never about us. Just wedding jitters. The scale of it all, 500 people watching us. Exchange vows. Relief washed over his features. I understand. But you can always talk to me, right? About anything. I nodded, amazed at his performance. Even now, knowing what I knew, his sincerity seemed absolute. No wonder I had been fooled for so long. Actually, I said carefully, there was something I wanted to discuss before the rehearsal dinner tonight. Of course. He guided me to the living room, where we sat side by side on the sofa. His hand rested casually on my knee, a gesture once comforting, now crawling across my skin like insects. I touched the brooch, activating the recording device. "I was thinking about the Foundation's financial report that you've been preparing. Will the board meeting still happen while we're on our honeymoon?" Jackson nodded, visibly relaxing at the mundane topic. "Yes, but don't worry. I've prepared everything in advance. Reynolds will present in my absence." Reynolds was one of the accountants Jackson had hired, a quiet man who rarely spoke at meetings. Another pawn in his game, perhaps? Or a co-conspirator? "I was wondering," I continued, choosing my words carefully, "about some of the investments you mentioned. The offshore accounts seemed complicated." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed his face before his expression smoothed into patient explanation. "That's standard diversification, Eliza. Moving funds through different markets protects against volatility." "Of course," I agreed. "It's just that when I tried to look at the reports, I couldn't quite follow the money trail. Some of those companies we're working with, like Artemis Holdings, I couldn't find much information about them." Jackson's hand tightened slightly on my knee, though his smile remained fixed. "Artemis is a private investment firm specializing in developing markets. Very exclusive, excellent returns. Your father would have appreciated the strategy, maximum benefit with carefully managed risk." The invocation of my father sent a surge of anger through me, but I masked it with a thoughtful nod. "And the transfers? Thomas mentioned something about large sums moving through multiple accounts." Now Jackson's expression definitely changed, a momentary hardening around his eyes before he chuckled dismissively. "Thomas means well, but finance isn't his strong suit. The transfers are routine fund movements to optimize tax benefits for the Foundation. Everything is documented and completely legitimate." The lies flowed so easily from him, wrapped in technical jargon he knew I wouldn't fully understand. I wondered how many times he had patronized me this way, counting on my trust to prevent further questions. "You're probably right," I said, infusing my voice with the admiring tone he expected. "You've done such amazing work with the Foundation's finances. The growth under your management has been remarkable." Pride, genuine pride, flickered across his face. "It hasn't been easy, but the results speak for themselves. The portfolio has performed exceptionally well." "I bet it has," I thought bitterly. Aloud, I said, "I'm so grateful you'll be managing our personal finances after the wedding, too. I've never been good with investment strategy." He squeezed my hand, his smile now relaxed and confident again. "That's what partnerships are about. Complementary strengths. You handle the heart of the Foundation, I'll handle the financial backbone." The double meaning in his words made me want to recoil, but instead, I leaned forward and kissed him gently. "We do make a good team." Jackson checked his watch. "I need to run to the office for a couple of hours before the rehearsal dinner. Last-minute details to wrap up before we leave for the honeymoon." He stood, straightening his already perfect tie. "Will you be okay? You seem a little off." I offered a self-deprecating smile. "Just tired. I didn't sleep well at the hotel. I miss our bed." "One more night apart, then a lifetime together," he said, kissing my forehead with what seemed like genuine affection. The performance was flawless. "I'll see you at the club at 7. Try to rest before then." After he left, I sat motionless on the sofa, listening to the silence of our shared home. I touched the brooch, stopping the recording. Had I gotten anything useful? His careful language revealed nothing explicit, but the timestamp and his voice, discussing Artemis Holdings, might provide additional context for Diana's evidence. I pulled out the burner phone and texted Thomas. He suspects nothing. "Going through with rehearsal dinner tonight. Keep working on evidence compilation." The reply came quickly. "Diana made breakthrough with bank records. Meeting with judge at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Marcus handling legal paperwork. All proceeding as planned." Moved through the penthouse, gathering what I would need for the next 24 hours. The rehearsal dinner dress, a cream-colored slip of silk that Jackson had helped me select. Jewelry, including Eleanor Reed's something borrowed diamond earrings. Overnight essentials for staying at the hotel where I'd be getting ready with my bridesmaids in the morning. Each item I packed felt like another step in an elaborate charade, a final performance before the curtain fell on Jackson's carefully constructed fiction. The wedding countdown clock on my phone showed 18 hours, 27 minutes until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. 18 hours until Jackson Reed discovered that his perfect mark had become his perfect nemesis. The Riverside Club glowed with warm light as I ascended its marble steps, Jackson's hand resting lightly against the small of my back. The historic building overlooking the Hudson River had been transformed for our rehearsal dinner. Cream roses and greenery adorned every surface. Soft jazz played by a quartet filled the air, and champagne flowed freely among our 70 closest friends and family members. "There's my beautiful girl!" Vivian Blackwell's voice rang out as she crossed the room to embrace me. My mother looked elegant as always in a sapphire blue gown that complemented her silver hair. "Are you ready for tomorrow, darling?" I returned her hug, holding on perhaps a moment too long. If she noticed, she attributed it to pre-wedding emotion. "As ready as I'll ever be, Mom." "You've done a wonderful job with everything," she said, turning to include Jackson in her approval. "Both of you have." Jackson beamed at her, the perfect soon-to-be son-in-law. "Eliza deserves all the credit." I just nodded and smiled at the right moments. My mother laughed and patted his cheek affectionately. "So modest. Jonathan would have adored you." The mention of my father stung sharply. I excused myself to greet other guests, needing space from the painful irony of my mother's words. Eleanor Reed intercepted me, resplendent in designer couture, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. "Eliza, darling." Her air kisses brushed my cheeks. "Everything is absolutely perfect. The flowers, the music. You've outdone yourself." "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied, maintaining my smile with effort. "Your suggestions were invaluable." "Nonsense. You have exquisite taste." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I always told Jackson he needed someone with both breeding and style. So many young women these days lack either one or the other." Nodded, wondering if she would be making such comments tomorrow when her son was being led away in handcuffs. Was she complicit in his scheme? Or just another victim of his deception? Either way, her world was about to shatter alongside mine. Madeline, Jackson's sister, appeared at my elbow, champagne flutes in hand. "Mom, stop monopolizing the bride." She handed me a glass and clinked hers against it. "To my favorite almost sister. By this time tomorrow, we'll officially be family." Madeline's genuine warmth made my heart ache. In the 4 years I'd known her, we'd become close friends. She'd been thrilled when Jackson and I got engaged, more excited about gaining a sister than about the social prestige of the match. Would she forgive me for what I was about to do to her brother? Would she understand that I had no choice? "To family," I echoed, taking a small sip of champagne. I needed to stay clear-headed tonight. Across the room, I spotted Thomas deep in conversation with our cousin Natalie, my maid of honor. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Diana and Marcus were not at the dinner, continuing their work to prepare for tomorrow. "There you are." Jackson's arm slipped around my waist, and he pressed a kiss to my temple. "The wedding planner wants us to practice our entrance before dinner is served." Genevieve, our unflappable wedding planner, directed us through the motions with crisp efficiency. "Tomorrow, you'll enter from opposite sides of the garden, meeting at the altar," she explained. "Tonight, we'll practice your entrance to the reception, which will happen after your first kiss as husband and wife." The irony of rehearsing an entrance for a reception that would never happen wasn't lost on me. Still, I went through the motions, smiling radiantly as Jackson and I were announced as the future Mr. and Mrs. Reed to applause from our inner circle. During dinner, Jackson's best man, Cameron Wright, rose to offer a toast. Cam had been Jackson's roommate at Yale and now served as a vice president at a competing investment firm. Their friendship had always seemed genuine to me, but now I wondered if Cameron knew about Jackson's schemes. Was he complicit? Another victim? Or simply blind to his friend's true nature? To Jackson and Eliza, Cameron raised his glass, his smile wide. I've known this guy since we were 18, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been with you. Eliza, you've made my friend a better man. The room echoed with hear, hear, and the clinking of glasses. I forced myself to smile, to lean into Jackson's embrace, to play the part of blissful bride-to-be while my stomach churned with anger and grief. As dinner progressed, I watched Jackson charm the room with practiced ease. The way he remembered personal details about everyone present. The thoughtful comments he made to my elderly great-aunt. The respectful way he deferred to senior board members of the foundation who attended. Every interaction perfectly calibrated to reinforce his image as the ideal partner, professional, and future son-in-law. It was a masterful performance, and until yesterday, I had been its most dedicated audience. "A penny for your thoughts," murmured my cousin Natalie, sliding into the empty chair beside me while Jackson was occupied with his former college professor. "You seem a million miles away." I manufactured a sheepish smile. "Just overwhelmed, I guess. Hard to believe that after all the planning, tomorrow's finally here." Natalie squeezed my hand. "You deserve all this happiness, Eliza. After losing Uncle Jonathan, we weren't sure you'd find your joy again." Jackson brought that back. To you. Her words, meant to comfort, twisted like a knife. Jackson hadn't brought back my joy. He'd exploited my grief, using my vulnerability and trust to infiltrate my family and steal from my father's legacy. "Thank you, Nat," I managed. "That means a lot." As dessert was served, a miniature version of our wedding cake, a 6-tier masterpiece, of vanilla bean and raspberry, Thomas caught my eye from across the room and made a subtle gesture toward the terrace. I excused myself, claiming a need for fresh air. "Any problems?" he asked quietly when I joined him in the cool evening air. I shook my head. "Everything's fine. Diana's recording device worked perfectly. I'm not sure how incriminating the conversation was, but it's something." "Diana's made significant progress," Thomas murmured. "She's traced most of the stolen funds. Judge Hernandez will issue the warrants first thing in the morning. And security for tomorrow? In place. 6 plainclothes officers positioned at all exits, plus the regular venue security. Once you make the announcement, they'll ensure Jackson doesn't leave until the police arrive." I nodded, gazing out at the Hudson River. The city lights reflected, on its dark surface, distorted and shimmering. How did he think he would get away with it, Thomas? Did he really believe no one would ever check his work? "Narcissism," Thomas replied simply. "Men like Jackson believe they're smarter than everyone else. His success in fooling us for so long only reinforced that belief." "Ms. Blackwell?" Genevieve's voice interrupted our conversation. "Mr. Reed is looking for you. It's almost time for the final toast." "Of course." I squared my shoulders, preparing to step back into my role. "I'll be right there." Thomas caught my arm before I could leave. "Eliza, are you sure you can do this? Another 12 hours of pretending?" I thought about the children at St. Jude's Hospital, where the foundation funded a research wing. About my father, who had dedicated his fortune to saving young lives. About the elaborate lies Jackson had told while systematically stealing from those children. "I can do anything for 12 more hours," I said with quiet determination. "Anything to see justice done." As I walked back into the glittering party, Jackson appeared in the doorway, his expression a perfect mixture of concern and affection. "There. You are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I was worried." I smiled up at him, channeling all my acting abilities into one performance. Just getting some air. Shall we go cut the cake? As we walked back into the room, arm in arm, Eleanor, Reed announced to the assembled guests, "Let's all raise a glass to Eliza and Jackson on the eve of their wedding. May tomorrow be the beautiful beginning of a lifetime of happiness together." If only she knew what tomorrow would actually bring. After the rehearsal dinner, tradition dictated that Jackson and I spend our final night before the wedding apart. He kissed me goodbye in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel, where I would be staying with my bridesmaids. "Next time I see you, you'll be walking down the aisle," he murmured against my hair. I forced myself to smile, to lean into his embrace. "One last time. I can hardly wait." "Get some sleep," he said, brushing his thumb across my cheek. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect." As his town car pulled away, I felt a curious mixture of relief and tension. Relief to be free of the exhausting performance. Tension knowing that the next 12 hours would determine whether our plan succeeded or failed catastrophically. Upstairs, my suite had been transformed into a pre-wedding headquarters. Champagne chilled in ice buckets, garment bags containing bridesmaid dresses hung along one wall, and gift baskets awaited each woman who would help me prepare for my supposed big day. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Everything in place. Evidence packets prepared. Meeting judge at 7 a.m. Sleep if you can." Sleep seemed impossible, but I knew I needed to at least try. The confrontation ahead would require all my strength and clarity. I took a sleeping pill, something I rarely did, and surrendered to a fitful slumber filled with fragmented dreams of weddings where the groom's face kept changing. I woke at dawn, momentarily disoriented in the hotel room. For one blessed second, I forgot everything. The betrayal, the plan, the impending confrontation. Then reality crashed back, and I sat up, checking my phone immediately. Thomas had texted at 6:30 a.m. "On our way to judge's chambers. Security confirmed. At venue. Mother still knows nothing. How are you holding up?" I typed back. "Ready to end this. Keep me posted." A knock at the door announced the arrival of room service, a breakfast I had ordered but had no appetite for. Behind the waiter came a parade of wedding day specialists. The hairstylist, makeup artist, manicurist, the assistant from the bridal boutique carrying my wedding dress in its garment bag, and finally, Genevieve, clipboard in hand, ready to manage the morning's timeline. "Good morning, bride," she chirped, her efficiency somehow comforting in the surreal circumstances. "We're right on schedule. Hair and makeup will take 2 hours. Then we'll get you into the dress by 11 a.m. The photographer arrives at 11:30 for pre-ceremony shots, and then we leave for the botanical gardens at 12:15. I nodded, allowing myself to be guided to a chair, where the hairstylist began working on my dark hair, twisting it into an elegant updo that would showcase Eleanor's diamond earrings and support the cathedral-length veil. My bridesmaids arrived in a flurry of excitement. Natalie first, followed by my cousins Rebecca and Sophia, my college roommate Mia, and finally Madeline. They exclaimed over the flowers that had been delivered. From Jackson, a cascade of white roses with a card reading, "To my beautiful bride, all my love," popped champagne despite the early hour, and surrounded me with chatter and laughter. Participated mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Was Diana with the judge now? Had Thomas secured the warrants? Was everything in place at the gardens? Earth to Eliza. Natalie waved her hand in front of my face. "Cold feet?" I forced a laugh. "Just trying to take it all in." "Well, take this in." Mia handed me a mimosa. Liquid courage. I pretended to sip, but set the glass aside when no one was looking. I needed complete clarity today. My phone buzzed again, and I checked it discreetly. Diana. Warrants secured. Police on standby. Evidence packets with Genevieve. Arriving at Gardens now to coordinate. Relief flooded through me. It was really happening. The machinery of justice was in motion, unstoppable now. "Who keeps texting you?" Madeline asked, curious, but not suspicious. "Please tell me my brother isn't sending you wedding day spoilers," I managed to smile. "Just Thomas checking on final details." The morning advanced with relentless momentum. My makeup was applied with artistic precision, subtle enough to look natural in person, but defined enough to photograph beautifully. My nails were painted a pale pink. The something blue garter was slipped into the dress bag. At 10:45, my phone buzzed one final time. "Thomas, everything in place. Mother has been discreetly informed to prepare herself. Diana and Marcus at venue with evidence, security positioned. When you're ready, just give the signal we discussed." I stared at the message, a sudden wave of doubt washing over me. Was I really going to do this? Publicly humiliate not just Jackson, but myself? Create a spectacle that would dominate social media and gossip columns for weeks? Hurt innocent people like Madeline and Eleanor in the process? Then I remembered the children's wing at Memorial Hospital, funded by the foundation, where young cancer patients fought for their lives. I thought of my father's face the day we opened that wing, his pride and sense of purpose despite his own failing health. I recalled Jackson's cold voice on the phone. "The old lady is completely clueless. Eliza? She's the easiest mark of all. I." Resolve hardened once more. This wasn't about public humiliation or revenge. It was about justice, about protecting my father's legacy and the children who depended on the foundation's work. "It's time for the dress," Genevieve announced, checking her watch with precision. The assistant from Elaine's bridal unzipped the garment bag, revealing the Marchesa gown in all its glory, a masterpiece of French lace, crystal beading, and architectural simplicity. The bridesmaids gasped appropriately. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," Natalie breathed. With practiced efficiency, they helped me into the gown, careful of my hair and makeup. The dress fit perfectly, as it should after 7 fittings. As I stood before the full-length mirror, Madeline carefully secured the cathedral veil to my updo, and Natalie fastened Eleanor's diamond earrings to my ears. "You look—" Madeline's voice caught, her eyes filling with tears. "My brother is the luckiest man alive." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. By this afternoon, Madeline would be facing a very different reality about her brother. "Are you ready for this?" Natalie asked, adjusting my veil one last time. "More ready than you know," I replied, and it was perhaps the first honest thing I'd said all morning. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the photographer, right on schedule. "The bride is ready," Genevieve called out, as camera shutters began clicking, capturing images of what the photographer assumed was a joyful bride preparing to meet her beloved. I met my own eyes in the mirror. The woman who looked back wasn't the trusting, naive Eliza Blackwell who had fallen for Jackson Reed's elaborate con. She was someone stronger, someone who had faced betrayal and chosen truth over comfortable lies. Someone who would protect what mattered, no matter the personal cost. "The cars are here," Genevieve announced, consulting her watch once more. "It's time to go to the gardens." I took a deep breath, gathering the skirts of my wedding gown. "I'm ready." The botanical gardens looked like something from a fairy tale. 500 white chairs arranged in perfect rows beneath the soaring glass ceiling of the conservatory. An altar adorned with cascading white orchids and greenery. Crystal chandeliers hung from the wrought iron framework, ready to catch the afternoon sunlight and scatter it like diamonds across the assembled guests. From the bridal suite, a renovated Victorian parlor at the edge of the rose garden, I could see guests beginning to arrive. Women in spring pastels and elaborate hats, men in morning suits, all exclaiming over the beauty of the venue. The string quartet had begun playing, the delicate notes of Pachelbel's canon drifting through the grounds. In precisely 42 minutes, I was scheduled to walk down the petal-strewn aisle to meet Jackson at the altar. Only I wouldn't be walking to join him. I would be walking to destroy him. The groom has arrived, Genevieve announced, returning from her circuit of the grounds. He's with the groomsmen in the elm room. I nodded, my heart racing. Everything was accelerating now, events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Genevieve, I said quietly, may I speak with you privately for a moment? She followed me to a corner of the suite, professional curiosity in her eyes. There's been a change of plans, I said, my voice steady despite my thundering pulse. The wedding will not proceed as expected. To her credit, Genevieve's expression remained absolutely neutral. I see. How would you like to handle this, Ms. Blackwell? I've been informed that Jackson has been embezzling from my family's foundation, I explained, keeping my voice low so the bridesmaids couldn't hear. The authorities have been notified, but I intend to confront him during the ceremony. Her eyes widened slightly, the only indication of her surprise. I understand. How can I assist you? Diana Winters has provided packets of evidence. I need them distributed to key people at my signal. I handed her a list of names. Board members, press, family representatives. Can you handle this discreetly? Genevieve took the list, her professionalism never wavering. Consider it done. And the timing? When the minister asks if anyone has any reason why we shouldn't be married, I said, the irony not lost on either of us. That's when I'll speak. She nodded once, decisive. I'll coordinate with security. Is there anything else you need? Just one thing, I said. Make sure my mother is seated next to Thomas. He'll support her through this. Of course. Genevieve squeezed my hand briefly, the only personal gesture she allowed herself. Ms. Blackwell, I've coordinated over 300 weddings in my career. This is the bravest thing I've ever seen a bride do. As she left to make the necessary arrangements, my phone buzzed one final time. Diana, in position, security placed. Evidence ready. Are you certain? I typed back a single word. Yes. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Natalie helped adjust my veil. Madeline handed me the bouquet of white roses and lily of the valley. The photographer captured these supposed last moments of my single life. It's time to line up, Genevieve announced, returning to the suite. Groomsmen and bridesmaids are in position. Mr. Blackwell is waiting to escort you. Thomas stood in the hallway, resplendent in his morning suit, his expression a careful mask of brotherly pride. Only I could see the tension in his jaw, the worry in his eyes. You don't have to do this, he murmured as he took my arm. We could still cancel, handle it privately. I shook my head slightly. We're past that point. This needs to happen. I managed a small smile. Besides, I didn't get into this dress for nothing. We watched as the bridesmaids processed down the aisle one by one, each on the arm of a groomsman. Madeline was last, escorted by Cameron. Then the music changed to the traditional wedding march, and the assembled guests rose to their feet, turning expectantly toward the entrance. Ready? Thomas asked softly. I took a deep breath. Ready? We stepped into the conservatory, and for a moment, the sheer beauty of the scene nearly overwhelmed me. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, catching in my veil. The faces of friends and family turned toward me with expressions of joy and affection. At the altar, framed by cascading orchids, stood Jackson, breathtakingly handsome in his tuxedo, his face lighting up at the sight of me. For one fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine an alternate reality where this was real, where Jackson truly loved me, where our life together would be built on truth instead of lies, where I would walk these final steps toward happiness rather than confrontation. Then, I remembered the truth, and my resolve hardened once more. The journey down the aisle seemed both endless and too brief. With each step, I noted key players in their positions: Diana standing discreetly near a side exit, Genevieve's assistants positioned strategically throughout the room with the evidence packets, security personnel stationed at each doorway. We reached the altar, and Thomas placed my hand in Jackson's, his grip perhaps a little too tight as he locked eyes with the man who had betrayed us all. Then he stepped back, taking his place beside our mother in the front row. "You look stunning," Jackson whispered, his eyes warm with what appeared to be genuine emotion. I smiled, saying nothing. The minister began the ceremony with practiced grace. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join Eliza Catherine Blackwell and Jackson James Reed in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over me as I stood facing Jackson, our hands joined, his expression one of perfect happiness. Did he believe his own performance at this point? Or was he simply counting the hours until he could access the next phase of his plan? The ceremony proceeded, the minister speaking of love and commitment, trust and honor, words that now rang hollow in the space between us. I watched Jackson's face, searching for any sign that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal, any flicker of guilt or remorse. I saw nothing but practiced sincerity. Finally, the moment arrived. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," a traditional formality, rarely answered in modern weddings. The minister barely paused, ready to continue with the vows. I took a deep breath and released Jackson's hands. "I can," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying through the hushed conservatory. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Jackson's expression froze, confusion replacing his smile. "Eliza?" he whispered. "What are you doing?" I turned to face our guests, conscious of the photographer still dutifully capturing what had suddenly become a very different kind of historic moment. "I apologize for the deception," I began, my voice stronger than I had expected. "But I'm afraid this wedding cannot proceed. 2 nights ago, I discovered that Jackson has been systematically embezzling from the Blackwell Children's Medical Foundation for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Eleanor Reed's sharp intake of breath. Jackson's hand gripped my arm. "Eliza, what are you talking about? This is insane." $22 million, I continued, gently but firmly removing his hand. "Stolen from programs meant to help children with cancer and rare diseases. Funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts." Now murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Genevieve's assistants moving efficiently, delivering the evidence packets to the designated recipients. "This is ridiculous," Jackson said, louder now, addressing the shocked guests. "Eliza is obviously having some kind of breakdown. The stress of the wedding. The evidence has been provided to the board members present," I continued, my voice never wavering, "as well as to the authorities, who I believe have just arrived." On cue, the main doors of the conservatory opened, and 3 police officers in formal uniforms entered, accompanied by a man in a dark suit who I recognized as the district attorney. Jackson's face drained of color. "Eliza, stop this. You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly," I said, turning back to him. "I heard you, Jackson. 2 nights ago, outside your office. I heard you on the phone, discussing how you targeted me from the beginning, how I was the perfect mark, how our marriage was just another step in your plan to steal from sick children." The conservatory erupted into chaos. Guests rose from their seats, craning their necks to see what was happening at the altar. Board members were already opening the evidence packets, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to outrage as they scanned the contents. Jackson's face had gone from pale to ashen, his eyes darting between my face, the approaching officers, and the exits where security personnel now stood at attention. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice no longer intimate but projected to reach the crowd. "Eliza is confused about standard financial practices. I can explain everything." Thomas stepped forward from the front row. The explanations can wait for court, Reed. The warrants have already been signed. Jackson's composure cracked further. He turned to me, dropping his voice so only I could hear. Why are you doing this? We could have discussed this privately. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I know exactly what I've done, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I've protected my father's legacy and the children who depend on the foundation. Something you were willing to destroy for your own profit. The district attorney reached the altar, flanked by the uniformed officers. Jackson James Reed, he announced formally. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. Eleanor Reed pushed through the crowd, her face contorted with disbelief. This is preposterous. My son would never… She broke off as one of the board members, Harold Winters, thrust the evidence packet toward her. Look at this, Eleanor. Bank transfers authorized by Jackson to companies that don't exist. Offshore accounts in the Caymans under his control. It's all here. My mother had not moved from her seat in the front row. She sat perfectly still, her face frozen in an expression of stunned betrayal. Thomas had his arm around her shoulders, speaking quietly into her ear. Madeline had dropped into a chair, the evidence packet open on her lap, her face ashen as she scanned the documents. Jackson, she whispered, looking up at her brother with devastation in her eyes. Tell me this isn't true. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion cross Jackson's face. Not remorse for his actions, but fear at being caught and humiliated. His eyes hardened as he looked at me. You think you've won? He hissed. You have no idea what you've just done to yourself, to your reputation, to the foundation. Mr. Reed, one of the officers interrupted. Please place your hands behind your back. Jackson ignored him, focusing his fury on me. I loved you, Eliza. Despite everything else, that part was real. And this is how you repay that love? By destroying me in front of everyone? You weren't destroying me in front of anyone, I replied quietly. You were doing it in secret, while pretending to love me. Which is worse? The officer moved forward with handcuffs. Jackson finally seemed to register the reality of his situation. His eyes darted desperately around the conservatory, perhaps seeking some escape route or ally who might intervene. Finding none, he made one last attempt to control the narrative. This is a mistake, he announced loudly, addressing the stunned wedding guests. A terrible misunderstanding that will be cleared up quickly. Eliza is not well. Grief over her father has affected her judgment. The foundation's finances are completely in order, as any proper audit will show. The district attorney stepped forward. Save it for your arraignment, Mr. Reed. The judge has already reviewed the preliminary evidence and found it compelling enough to issue the warrants. As the officers moved to handcuff him, Jackson's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed completely. You'll regret this, he snarled at me, all pretense of affection gone. When this falls apart, when you're humiliated and alone, remember it was your choice. I watched in silence as they led him down the aisle, past the rows of shocked guests, their whispers rising like a tide behind him. The photographer, to his credit, had stopped taking pictures, his professional instincts finally overcome by the unprecedented situation. In the sudden vacuum left by Jackson's departure, I became acutely aware of 500 pairs of eyes fixed on me, the beautiful bride, standing alone at the altar, having just publicly accused and arranged the arrest of her groom. Diana appeared at my side, her presence steady and reassuring. You did it, she said quietly. It's over. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The questions, the scandal, the painful reconstruction of the foundation's finances and reputation. And my own heart, shattered but somehow still beating. Genevieve, ever the professional, took command of the chaotic situation. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying through the conservatory. As you can see, the wedding will not be proceeding. The Blackwell family thanks you for your understanding during this difficult time and asks for privacy as they address this matter further. Security began discreetly guiding guests toward the exits. Most went willingly, eager to process what they had just witnessed, though I could see phones already out, no doubt spreading the news across social media platforms. By nightfall, every detail of Jackson Reed's spectacular downfall would be trending nationwide. Eleanor Reed remained frozen near the altar, her aristocratic features rigid with shock and humiliation. I approached her slowly, unsure of what to say but feeling some obligation to acknowledge her pain. "Eleanor, don't," she cut me off, her voice brittle. "Don't you dare pretend to be sorry for this spectacle." Her eyes, so like Jackson's, burned with hostility. "You could have handled this privately. Instead, you chose to destroy our family name in the most public way possible." Before I could respond, Madeline stepped between us, her face tear-stained but composed. "Mom, stop. This isn't Eliza's fault." "How can you say that?" Eleanor demanded. "She orchestrated this entire humiliation." Madeline shook her head, clutching the evidence packet. "Jackson orchestrated his own downfall. These documents, there's no mistake, Mom. He did this. He stole from sick children." Eleanor's face crumpled, the first crack in her perfect composure. "There must be some explanation, some mistake." "I wish there were," I said softly. "Believe me, I would give anything for this to be a mistake." Thomas joined us, his expression grim but resolved. "Mrs. Reed, a car is waiting to take you and Madeline home. I suggest you contact your family attorney immediately. This situation will move quickly now that the arrests have been made." "Arrests? Plural?" I asked, suddenly alert. Thomas nodded. "Rebecca Matthews was taken into custody at her apartment this morning, and Blake Thompson was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to Buenos Aires." Jackson's accomplices. Of course he hadn't worked alone. Rebecca was the foundation's investment advisor, someone Jackson had brought in shortly after taking over the finances. Blake was a board member who had always supported Jackson's proposals without question. My mother finally approached, her movements slow and precise, as if she feared she might shatter with any sudden motion. Her eyes, so like my own, were filled with a pain I hadn't seen since my father's death. "All this time," she whispered, "he was stealing from Jonathan's legacy, using our family, using you." She reached out to touch my face, her fingers cool against my cheek. "How did you discover it?" "I overheard him," I said simply. 2 nights ago. He was on the phone in his office talking about the transfers, about how he'd targeted me from the beginning. "And you've been carrying this knowledge alone? Planning this?" The realization seemed to cause her physical pain. "Oh, Eliza." "Not alone," I corrected, glancing at Thomas. "I had help." My mother straightened her shoulders, something of her usual strength returning. "Well, it seems we have a great deal of work ahead of us." Diana approached, phone in hand. "The press is gathering outside the gardens. We need to decide how to handle this." Around us, the beautiful wedding decorations, the flowers, the ribbons, the candles yet to be lit, seemed to mock the devastation that had replaced celebration. My wedding day had become something else entirely. The day Jackson Reed's crimes were exposed, the day the Blackwell Foundation began its road to recovery, the day I chose truth over happiness. Or perhaps, though I couldn't yet see it, the first day of a different kind of freedom. The days following what the press dubbed the wedding that wasn't passed in a blur of legal meetings, damage control, and painful realizations. The botanical gardens, once decorated for celebration, had been dismantled with quiet efficiency. The 5-tier wedding cake, never cut, was donated to a homeless shelter. The gifts were returned with carefully worded notes of explanation and apology. I moved out of the penthouse immediately, unable to bear the space where Jackson and I had built our life together, a life that had been largely fiction. Thomas insisted, I stay with him while I regrouped, and I gratefully accepted, finding comfort in the familiar patterns of my brother's household and the absence of memories there. 3 days after the non-wedding, I sat in the Foundation's main conference room, surrounded by board members, forensic accountants, and legal counsel. The preliminary assessment of the damage was sobering. 22 million confirmed missing, reported Howard Green, the senior forensic accountant. Possibly more that we haven't yet tracked. Mr. Reed was remarkably thorough in covering his tracks. What's the recovery outlook? I asked, forcing myself to focus on practical matters rather than the emotional devastation still threatening to overwhelm me. Marcus Chen, who hadn't left my side through the ordeal, consulted his notes. The offshore accounts have been frozen, but legal recovery is complicated. We're looking at months, possibly years of litigation. And the Foundation's operations in the meantime? This from Dr. Lillian Parker, one of our longest-serving board members. We've secured emergency funding to continue the most critical programs, Thomas answered. But some initiatives will need to be temporarily suspended while we rebuild our financial base. I thought of the children whose treatments might be delayed, whose research grants might be paused, whose families had counted on our support. The weight of it pressed on my chest like a physical burden. What about public perception? Asked Harold Winters, voicing the concern everyone shared but few had articulated. How much damage has this done to donor confidence? The PR consultant, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa Roberts, addressed this directly. The situation is delicate but not irredeemable. Ms. Blackwell's decisive action actually works in the Foundation's favor. She discovered the fraud and immediately exposed it, prioritizing the organization's mission over personal considerations. That resonates with people. The press has been surprisingly sympathetic, added Marcus. The jilted bride exposes corrupt groom narrative has captured public imagination in a way that's actually generating increased awareness of the Foundation's work. It was true. In the 72 hours since the aborted wedding, donations had actually increased. Small amounts from thousands of ordinary people touched by the story of betrayal and resilience. Notes accompanied many of these donations. Stay strong. You did the right thing. My daughter benefited from your research program. We stand with you. The meeting continued for hours as we mapped out a recovery plan. A new financial oversight committee. External auditors with specialized nonprofit experience. A restructured board with more diverse expertise. Each decision felt like placing a brick in the foundation of something new, rising from the ashes of what had been destroyed. As the boardroom emptied, Thomas lingered, studying my face with brotherly concern. You're holding up better than anyone could expect, he observed. But you don't have to be strong all the time, Eliza. Not with me. I offered a tired smile. I'm not being strong. I'm just functioning. There's too much at stake to fall apart right now. And later? Later. I sighed, finally allowing some of the exhaustion to show. Later I'll figure out how to rebuild my personal life. But the Foundation comes first. That's what Dad would have wanted. That evening, alone in the guest room at Thomas's brownstone, I finally allowed myself to fully confront the personal wreckage Jackson had left behind. I opened my laptop and, against my better judgment, checked social media. The story was everywhere, with varying degrees of accuracy. Blackwell heiress exposes fiancé's massive fraud scheme at altar. Wedding day revenge, how Eliza Blackwell turned the tables on her corrupt groom. Jilted justice, inside the wedding that became an arrest. Photos from the rehearsal dinner circulated alongside courthouse shots of Jackson being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. The contrast was jarring. The handsome, smiling man who had seemed to adore me, transformed overnight into a cornered criminal. More painful were the messages flooding my private accounts. Old friends expressing shock and sympathy, distant acquaintances, offering support they never would have extended otherwise. strangers claiming some connection or insight into my situation. I closed the laptop, unable to bear more. Then, for the first time since discovering Jackson's betrayal, I allowed myself to truly break down. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, racking my body as I finally mourned. Not just for the relationship I had lost, but for the future I had imagined, the memories now tainted, the trust that had been shattered. I cried until there were no tears left, until exhaustion claimed me and I fell into dreamless sleep, still wearing my clothes from the board meeting. Morning came with unexpected clarity. As sunlight filtered through the unfamiliar curtains of Thomas's guest room, I felt something I hadn't expected, a peculiar lightness, as if the night's breakdown had cleared space for something new to emerge. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Meeting with prosecutors at 10. They have questions about timeline. Also, Eleanor Reed has requested to see you. Eleanor's request surprised me. I hadn't heard from Jackson's mother since the wedding day confrontation. What could she possibly want now? I met with the prosecutors first, reviewing my statement about discovering Jackson's scheme. They were particularly interested in the recorded conversation from the brooch, which, while not explicitly incriminating, provided context that strengthened their case. Mr. Reed has hired Skylar Williams as his defense attorney, the assistant district attorney informed me. They'll fight hard, but with the evidence we've gathered, we're confident in securing a conviction. Skylar Williams was one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the city. I wondered briefly how Jackson was paying for his services, then realized his mother would spare no expense to defend her son, regardless of his guilt. Meeting Eleanor felt like stepping back into the aftermath of the wedding day. We sat in the formal parlor of her Connecticut estate, the space so perfectly appointed it felt like a stage set rather than a home. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I realize you have no obligation to speak with me. I felt I owed you that much," I replied honestly. Eleanor studied me, her gaze clinical rather than hostile. "The evidence Diana Winters compiled? It's quite comprehensive, isn't it?" "Yes, there's no doubt about what Jackson did." She nodded, slowly. "I've seen it now, all of it. The transfers, the shell companies, the offshore accounts." A shuddering breath escaped her. "My son is a thief. He stole from sick children." The admission clearly cost her dearly. Whatever else Eleanor Reed might be, she was a woman who valued her family's reputation above almost everything. "I wanted you to know," she continued, her composure remarkably intact, "that I am personally establishing a restitution fund, $25 million to replace what Jackson took with interest. It won't undo the damage to the foundation's reputation, but it will ensure the programs continue." The gesture shocked me. "Eleanor, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Her spine straightened. "The Reed name has stood for something in this city for generations. I won't allow my son's actions to destroy that legacy entirely." She met my eyes, directly. "And I owe it to you, Eliza. For what my son did to you, for what my family did to yours." In that moment, I saw something unexpected in Eleanor Reed. Not just the society matriarch protecting her family name, but a woman grappling with profound disillusionment about her own child. We were, in some strange way, fellow survivors of Jackson's deception. 6 months after what should have been my wedding day, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated children's wing of Memorial Hospital. Camera flashes punctuated my speech as I officially reopened the facility, now named in honor of my father, the Jonathan Blackwell Pediatric Research Center. "Today marks not just the reopening of a medical facility," I told the assembled crowd of donors, medical staff, and families, "but a recommitment to the mission my father established, that no child should be denied hope because of financial limitations." The past half year had been a journey of reconstruction, both for the foundation and for me personally. Jackson's trial had concluded swiftly, the evidence against him so overwhelming that even Schuyler Williams's legendary courtroom skills couldn't create reasonable doubt. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Rebecca Matthews, his primary accomplice, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony, receiving a 5-year sentence. Blake Thompson was serving 7 years. The stolen funds had been largely recovered, thanks to the frozen offshore accounts and Eleanor Reed's substantial restitution payment. Through the darkest moments, I continued, this community showed us what resilience truly means. The donations that poured in from around the country, the volunteers who stepped forward, the board members who worked tirelessly to rebuild our programs. You reminded us that one person's actions cannot destroy a mission built on compassion and hope. In the front row sat my mother, elegant as always, though the past months had etched new lines around her eyes. Beside her was Thomas, whose steady presence had been my anchor through the storm. Madeline Reed sat with them. Our friendship had survived her brother's betrayal, evolving into something deeper and more authentic than before. Eleanor had declined to attend, though her financial support continued. She had retreated from public life, focusing on her garden and her remaining family ties. We maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship, linked forever by the man who had betrayed us both. Today, we look forward, I concluded, not with naive optimism, but with hard-won wisdom and renewed purpose. The Blackwell Foundation has emerged stronger, more transparent, and more committed than ever to serving children in need. As applause filled the atrium, I stepped away from the podium, greeting board members and donors with the practiced ease I'd developed over months of public appearances. The media still followed the story with interest, though the sensational headlines had gradually given way to more substantive coverage of the Foundation's reforms and renewed mission. Later that evening, alone in my new apartment overlooking the river, I reflected on the transformation of the past 6 months. The pain of Jackson's betrayal had not disappeared entirely. Perhaps it never would. But it had evolved into something different. A scar rather than an open wound. A lesson rather than merely a loss. I picked up the framed photograph on my bookshelf. My father on the day the original wing had opened, his face thin from illness but his eyes bright with purpose. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "We protected your legacy." My phone buzzed with a text from Diana Winters. "You killed it today. The press coverage is excellent. Donations already coming in." Diana had transitioned from private investigator to the Foundation's head of security and compliance, a new position created specifically to prevent any future financial improprieties. Her meticulous attention to detail and unwavering integrity made her perfect for the role. "Thanks for everything," I replied. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." It was true. Diana, Thomas, Marcus, they had been instrumental in not just exposing Jackson's fraud but helping rebuild in its aftermath. Yet somewhere along the way, I had discovered strengths within myself I hadn't known existed. The ability to face public scrutiny without crumbling. The courage to make difficult decisions. The resilience to begin again after devastating loss. The woman who had almost married Jackson Reed, trusting, perhaps naive, defined largely by her family name and father's legacy, no longer existed. In her place stood someone more cautious but also more authentic. Someone who understood that love without truth was merely an illusion, that trust must be earned rather than freely given, that strength sometimes meant choosing the harder path when an easier one was available. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Thomas stood in the hallway, takeout bags in hand. "Thought you might want company," he said, following me into the kitchen. "It's been a big day." "A good day," I corrected, getting plates from the cabinet. The first truly good one in a long time. We settled at the dining table, the city lights twinkling through the windows as we shared Thai food and conversation about the Foundation's newest initiatives. "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, watching me over his wine glass, "when all this first happened, I was worried about you. Not just about the immediate crisis, but about what it would do to you in the long run. You thought I'd never trust anyone again, I guessed. He nodded. Or that you'd retreat completely, build walls so high no one could reach you. I considered this. There had certainly been moments, especially in the immediate aftermath, when that seemed the safest option. To protect myself by isolating, to avoid vulnerability by avoiding connection altogether. I thought about it, I admitted. But eventually I realized that would mean Jackson won, that his betrayal would define the rest of my life. I twirled, noodles around my fork. I refused to give him that power. So what comes next for Eliza Blackwell? Thomas asked. Now that the foundation is back on solid ground? It was a question I'd been asking myself recently. The foundation would always be part of my life, but perhaps not its entirety. The crisis had forced me to develop new skills, to step into leadership in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were other opportunities emerging, speaking engagements, about organizational ethics, consulting on nonprofit governance, even a potential book deal. I'm not entirely sure, I answered honestly. But I know it will be something meaningful, something that uses everything I've learned, not just about financial oversight, but about human nature, about how the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who betray us, and how strength often comes from our deepest wounds. Thomas raised his glass in a toast. To whatever comes next, then. As we clinked glasses, my mind drifted briefly. To Jackson, confined now to a prison cell instead of the corner office he'd once commanded. I wondered if he ever thought about what might have been if he'd chosen differently. If he'd actually loved me as he had pretended to. If he'd embraced the legitimate opportunities the foundation offered rather than stealing from it. But his choices weren't my burden to carry. My responsibility was to the path ahead, a path transformed by betrayal, but not defined by it. The truth that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately set me free. Free from illusion. Free from a marriage built on deception. Free to become someone, stronger than I had imagined possible. Jackson had once seen me as the perfect mark, trusting, vulnerable, an easy target for his elaborate con. In the end, that assessment had proven to be his greatest miscalculation. Because beneath the trust and vulnerability lay a core of resilience he had never recognized, a strength that emerged precisely when it was most needed. Some people are broken by betrayal. Others are remade by it. I had chosen the latter path. Not because it was easier, but because it was the only one that honored the truth, with all its pain and all its power. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.